The Body Knows episode 3, Social Punishment and Control. Welcome back to The Body Knows, and it's good to have you here again. If you've been with me since the beginning of this journey, you'll know that in episode 1, we explored what we really mean by behaviour and why behaviour is less about discipline or morality and more about the body's constant attempt to cope with stress, overwhelm, and expectation. In episode 2, we went deeper into the nervous system itself, into neuroception, mirror neurons, and the ways the body makes split-second judgments about safety and danger long before thought catches up. Today, we turn to something even more unsettling, because it strikes at the core of what it means to be human. What happens when the group turns against us? This is the realm of social punishment, of shame, of exclusion, of silence. This is about what occurs not in the solitary encounter between two individuals, but in the collective gaze of many. It is about the nervous system's most sensitive territory, belonging. Because here is a truth we often forget: belonging is not optional. It never has been. For most of human history, to be excluded from the group was to die. If the tribe cast you out, you had no fire, no protection, no shared labor to help you survive. The nervous system evolved with this reality burned into its circuits. That is why ostracism feels so devastating. Why gossip cuts deeper than we admit. Why silence can feel like violence. The body interprets exclusion as a mortal threat. Shame, then, is not just a social emotion. It is a survival alarm. When shame flares, the vagus nerve shifts, the gut contracts, the face flushes, the heart rate stumbles. Polyvagal theory explains this clearly. The ventral vagal system, which keeps us socially engaged and calm, flickers offline. We slip into sympathetic arousal, fight or flight, or even further down into dorsal vagal collapse, the posture of defeat, the heaviness of giving up. This is why shame feels like shrinking, like wanting to disappear. It is the body preparing for social death. Not metaphorical, not exaggerated. Evolutionary biology has wired exclusion to register as lethal. Let me pause here and emphasize, this is not a weakness. This is design. The body is supposed to react this way. The terror of exclusion kept our ancestors alive. It kept them aligned with group norms, watchful for cues of acceptance. But what was once adaptive can become weaponized. Groups, systems, and institutions quickly discovered that shame is the most efficient tool of control. You don't need to strike someone if you can silence them with the threat of being cast out. You don't need bars and chains if you can rely on gossip and cold shoulders. Shame does the work for you. That is what we're exploring today. How the body experiences social punishment in real time. What exclusion does to the nervous system. How shame and silence regulate groups. And why intuition sometimes whispers the deeper truth. You don't belong here, and that's survival too. I want to root this episode in a story of my own, because theory always lands more powerfully when anchored in lived experience. There was a night, years ago, when I walked into a group of friends, people I had been close to, people I thought I could trust. But something had happened before I arrived. One individual had been rude, cutting, and cruel to another earlier in the evening. When I entered the room, I wasn't part of that moment, but I could feel the residue in the air. The tension was immediate, thick, unspoken. My body registered it instantly. My voice became quieter. My usual energy dimmed. I became an observer more than a participant, scanning the room for what I could not yet name. A brief outburst came later. One of the individuals snapped at another, and in that split second, the entire group froze. Everyone looked at each other, eyes darting, faces tightening. It was a collective nervous system response. A moment of synchrony where everybody oriented to the same threat. And then, when that person finally left, something even more sinister unfolded. The group began to dissect them, to gossip, to criticize, to speculate not only about the one who had just departed, but about others not even present. It was a social autopsy, performed in hushed tones and sharp glances. And in that moment my body spoke with clarity. This is not safe. This is not a group I want to remain aligned with. If they can do this to one, they will do this to me. If they haven't already, it's only a matter of time. I didn't need proof. I didn't need to overhear the words directly. My body had already made the judgment. And later, of course, I did find out the truth. They had talked behind my back. This is the scenario I want to build from today. Because on that evening, every layer of the social nervous system was at work: neuroception, shame, mirror neurons, intuition, and survival instinct. And every cultural mechanism of control was present too: gossip, scapegoating, exclusion, silence. The philosopher René Girard wrote about the scapegoat mechanism, the way groups maintain cohesion by directing tension toward one victim. By casting someone out, the group finds relief, a twisted sense of unity. But the cost is immense, because it teaches everyone else to live in fear of being next. Michel Foucault wrote about surveillance, how the gaze, even more than violence, disciplines the body. And gossip is one of the oldest forms of surveillance. It is the panopticon of the village, the unblinking eye of the crowd. Yet beneath all this theory lies something more visceral, more immediate. The vagus nerve tightening, the breath shallowing, the gut clenching, the heart fluttering. This is not abstract. This is not symbolic. This is your body experiencing the threat of exile in real time. Over the course of this episode, I want to do three things. First, I want to walk slowly through that group scenario step by step, showing exactly what the body does as exclusion unfolds. Second, I want to weave in the science, polyvagal theory, shame research, and ostracism studies, which explain why it feels so unbearable. And third, I want to open the philosophical and cultural lens: how shame has been weaponized, how exclusion regulates groups, and how intuition sometimes points the way to freedom. Because here is the paradox: while shame and exclusion hurt us, they can also save us. They can be signals that we are in the wrong group, the wrong system, the wrong alignment. The pain is real, but so is the clarity. And learning to discern the difference when shame is manipulation and when it is the body's wisdom may be one of the most important skills of survival in our age. So as we begin, I invite you to reflect. Can you recall a moment when a group turned cold toward you? A silence after your words, a look exchanged, an atmosphere shifting against you? How did your body respond? And did you ignore it, or did you listen? This is where we're heading. Into the silence that cuts deeper than words. Into the cold gaze that regulates belonging. Into the ancient, terrifying, and sometimes liberating territory of social punishment and control. The story begins not with the outburst, not with the gossip, but with the doorway. The very instant I walked into that room, my nervous system had already begun its scan. Neuroception doesn't wait for introductions. It doesn't wait for explanations. It begins as soon as you cross a threshold. I remember it clearly. The first impression wasn't visual, not in the way we think. It was atmospheric. A heaviness in the air, as though the molecules themselves had rearranged. This is how neuroception often presents itself, not as a clear thought, but as a felt shift. A sense of tension, of vigilance, of something unsaid. The brainstem, amygdala, and insula were already at work, collecting signals before I could consciously name them. My posture shifted almost immediately. I became less expansive, less eager. My body pulled slightly inward. The vagus nerve, that great mediator between safety and withdrawal, began to move me out of social engagement mode and closer to defensive readiness. My shoulders softened inward, my voice dimmed. I wasn't deciding to be quiet. The body was already preparing for a threat. This is where mirror neurons come in. Without realizing it, I was already mirroring the room. The group was tense, guarded, holding back, and so was I. Their posture became mine, their silence echoed in my own. This wasn't mimicry, it was survival. To blend is to stay safe. To stand out in a moment like this is to risk drawing the threat toward yourself. The body knows this, even if you don't. Studies back this up. Research on emotional contagion shows that tension spreads faster than laughter, that anxiety echoes more strongly than calm. In groups, one person's guardedness can shift the atmosphere for everyone. In neuroscience terms, the amygdalae of multiple people begin to resonate, creating what's being called inter-brain synchrony. It feels like the vibe, but it's measurable in fMRI and EEG. When I walked into that room, my nervous system instantly locked onto the group's collective state. This is why the cliché, "you could cut the tension with a knife," is more than a metaphor. Tension is an embodied reality. Heart rates rise together, breathing patterns shift, cortisol levels spike. The nervous system doesn't just respond individually, it tunes itself to the group. And so I became quieter, my usual engagement dimmed. I didn't leap into the conversation or crack a joke. I observed. I waited. My body had tilted from social engagement into cautious watchfulness. This is important. Silence is not always chosen. Silence is often a nervous system state. Polyvagal theory explains this well. In safe states, the ventral vagal branch is active, heart rate steady, breath slow, voice resonant, eyes bright. But when the body senses threat, sympathetic arousal, fight, flight, or dorsal vagal shutdown, collapse, silence can take over. I wasn't choosing silence as a strategy. Silence was the physiological outcome of entering a room my body judged as unsafe. The evolutionary roots of this are deep. For early humans, walking into a tense group could mean walking into danger. If alliances had shifted, if conflict was brewing, the cost of standing out could be lethal. So the body developed strategies: quiet down, blend in, and observe before acting. My nervous system was carrying out this ancient program, even though all I had done was walk into a modern living room. And then there was the subtle social monitoring. Neuroception doesn't just scan for threat, it scans for hierarchy, for status, for shifting alliances. My eyes darted to the group, catching micro-expressions, glances, and the way bodies were angled toward or away from each other. My insula translated these cues into gut feelings. Something was wrong. Someone had been hurt. A conflict lingered beneath the surface. My body didn't need the backstory. It had already mapped the dynamic. Psychological research confirms this. Humans are exquisitely sensitive to ostracism cues. In the classic cyberball experiment, participants excluded from a simple online ball-tossing game showed immediate drops in self-esteem and increases in social pain, measured in the anterior cingulate cortex, the same region that processes physical pain. Exclusion hurts as much as a wound. Walking into that room, my body was already bracing for the possibility of exclusion. The silence, the guardedness, the lack of warmth. These were tiny signals that my place in the group might be unstable. I didn't say this to myself at the time, of course. I didn't think, my vagus nerve has shifted and my amygdala is scanning for threat. What I thought was simpler. It feels tense here. I'll just be quiet for now. But behind that thought, 1,000 processes were firing. My heart rate was subtly higher. My breath shallower. My voice, when I did speak, was slightly thinner. My body was preparing for something I couldn't name. And this is where the philosophical dimension begins to emerge. Was I reading the group accurately, or was I projecting my own history onto them? Was this intuition, or was it trauma residue? The line between the two is thin. But in moments like this, the question itself may not matter, because neuroception is always true to something, either to the present danger or to the memory of past danger. And in both cases, listening is wiser than dismissing. As I stood there, listening more than speaking, I felt my younger self echoing through me, the child who had gone silent under pressure, who had become selectively mute when overwhelmed. My adult nervous system was replaying the same script: safety through quiet, protection through withdrawal. It wasn't a failure, it was an adaptation. My body had learned long ago that silence was safer than expression in the wrong company, and that memory was alive again in this group of so-called friends. This is where shame begins to creep in, because often when we go quiet in groups, we judge ourselves. We think, why am I not speaking up? Why am I shrinking? Why can't I just relax and join in? But what looks like weakness is usually protection. The body isn't betraying us. It's defending us in the only way it knows. In that living room, silence was my shield. Less active participation was my nervous system's way of saying, stay safe until the threat becomes clear. And it would become clear. The room had been tense from the start, but tension has a way of hiding. People smile politely, voices hold a practiced tone, and bodies stay upright and seemingly composed. Beneath the surface, though, the nervous system is working hard, scanning, adjusting, bracing. And then the outburst. It didn't last long. Just a few words, sharp, sudden, an edge breaking through the thin veil of civility. But in that instant, everything changed. What I remember most vividly is not the words themselves, but the collective reaction. Every head turned. Every pair of eyes flicked across the room. There was a brief, synchronized silence, thick and heavy. A freeze rippled through the group like a shockwave. This is how the nervous system works in a social context. One sudden threat cue, A raised voice, an aggressive tone, a hostile gesture, and the amygdala of everyone present fire almost simultaneously. The startle response isn't private, it's contagious. Heart rates spike together, pupils dilate in unison, muscles tense across multiple bodies at once. It's as though the group shares one nervous system in that moment, tuned to the same alarm. Neuroscience confirms this. Research on social fear contagion shows that when one person displays fear or anger, others nearby exhibit mirrored amygdala activation within milliseconds. The body doesn't wait to check whether the threat is aimed at us personally. It prepares as if it is. In evolutionary terms, this makes sense. If one member of the tribe detected danger, it was safer for everyone to react than to pause and ask questions. Hesitation could mean death. So the outburst triggered not just one nervous system, but many. A chorus of alarms, each body adjusting in synchrony. For me, the response was to freeze. My body locked in place, breath catching, voice lost. This wasn't a conscious choice. The freeze response is as old as life itself. Polyvagal theory explains it through the dorsal vagal pathway. When fight or flight seem impossible, the body shuts down instead. Muscles stiffen or collapse, the throat tightens, and the eyes widen but stay still. You become smaller, quieter, hoping to avoid the strike. And in groups, freeze is magnified. Because it isn't just your own nervous system you're managing, it's the gaze of everyone else. The outburst directed at another person was enough to pull me into silence. But what intensified it was the awareness of all those glances, all those eyes darting, all those bodies stiffening in unison. The group itself became the amplifier of fear. There is something uniquely painful about that collective glance. When everyone looks, even for a second, you feel exposed. It may not even be you they're looking at. But the weight of attention activates the same circuits as shame. The anterior cingulate cortex, the brain region involved in processing physical pain, lights up during social pain as well. Being stared at in a moment of conflict registers as a wound. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre described this in Being and Nothingness with the concept of the look. When someone else looks at you, you become an object in their world. You are seen, pinned, defined, and in groups this gaze multiplies. It becomes inescapable. The look becomes the cage. In that split second of collective attention, every nervous system in the room colluded in my silence. It is worth slowing this down further, because this is how the body tells the story of social punishment. The outburst, a sharp tone hits the auditory system. The amygdala fires. The vagus nerve withdraws social engagement. The collective glance, eyes dart, micro-expressions shift. Mirror neurons echo the fear across the group. The insula registers the gut drop, the freeze. Breath catches, throat tightens, posture stiffens. The sympathetic system flares and is quickly overridden by dorsal vagal shutdown. Silence takes over. The shame layer, awareness of others' eyes adds social pain. The anterior cingulate cortex registers hurt, as though physically struck. It all happens in seconds, but the impact lingers far longer. There's an evolutionary logic here too. In early human groups, open conflict was dangerous. Too much fighting could fracture the tribe, reducing chances of survival. So nervous systems evolved to manage conflict collectively. One outburst, one signal, many bodies freezing, diffusing, waiting. It was a way of buying time, preventing escalation, maintaining cohesion. But in modern contexts, this ancient mechanism leaves us paralyzed. We freeze even when speech might help. We go silent even when we want to speak. This is why social fear is so powerful. It isn't abstract. It isn't simply worrying what people think. It is biology. It is the vagus nerve withdrawing its support, the amygdala blaring, the prefrontal cortex dimming. You can't reason your way out of freeze. You can only wait, regulate, and gently coax yourself back into safety. Looking back, I can see how this moment fit a familiar pattern in my life. As a child, when adults fought or voices rose, I often froze in the same way. My body remembered that exposure was dangerous, that silence was safer. And here, in adulthood, the same script replayed. Different actors, same nervous system choreography. But there was also something else, something quieter beneath the freeze. A whisper of intuition. A sense that the collective glance wasn't just about the outburst itself. It was about the group's deeper dynamic. The way everyone looked at each other, the way no one spoke, the way the silence thickened, it told me that conflict here wasn't resolved through honesty or care. It was absorbed into tension, redirected into gossip, and spread through silence. The freeze wasn't just mine, it belonged to the group. And that realization planted a seed. This isn't where I belong. Philosophy helps frame this too. René Girard's theory of mimetic desire suggests that humans are driven not only by what we want individually, but by what others around us desire or fear. We mirror each other's longings, rivalries, and hostilities. In moments like this, desire for belonging collides with fear of exclusion. Everyone looks, everyone freezes, because no one wants to be the next target. The group bonds in silence at the cost of honesty. This is the cruel efficiency of social punishment. It doesn't just suppress the one who spoke or misstepped. It disciplines everyone else through fear. When the outburst happens, when the collective glance locks the room into silence, every nervous system learns the same lesson. Don't be the one who stands out. Don't be next. And that lesson lingers. Even after the outburst ended, even after the conversation resumed, my body stayed quiet, cautious, less engaged. The freeze may only last seconds, but the social fear can last hours, days, or even years in memory. The body remembers the silence, the gaze, the sense of being one misstep away from exile. Looking back, I understand that moment as both painful and clarifying. Painful, because the freeze robbed me of my voice. Clarifying, because my intuition recognized the pattern. This was a group held together by fear, by gossip, by exclusion. And if I stayed, I would always be managing that fear. Eventually, I would be the one whispered about when I left the room. The body knew before the mind admitted it. The freeze wasn't just fear, it was insightful. It was survival pointing me toward a truth. Get out while you can. The outburst passed quickly, but the tension didn't. If anything, it thickened. The individual who had snapped eventually left, and for a moment the room seemed to exhale. Shoulders loosened slightly, voices softened, the atmosphere lightened. But that release was deceptive. What followed was, in its own way, more sinister. Almost as soon as the door closed behind them, the group turned inward. Conversations shifted. The absent person became the subject. Their words, their behaviour, their flaws, dissected, analysed, judged. And not just them, the circle widened. Others who weren't present that night were pulled into the discussion, their reputations handled as though they were bargaining chips on a table. This is gossip, and gossip is never just idle chatter. It is one of the oldest and most efficient tools of social regulation. Anthropologists suggest that gossip evolved as a way of maintaining group cohesion in early human tribes. By talking about others, especially those who violated norms, groups reinforced their standards and discouraged deviance. To be gossiped about was to risk exclusion. To participate in gossip was to signal loyalty to the group. But gossip has a darker side. It binds people together through shadow. The unity it creates is not built on trust or compassion, but on shared judgment. The group feels stronger, but only because someone else has been weakened in their absence. This is what René Girard identified in his theory of the scapegoat. Communities diffuse their own tensions by projecting them onto a victim. The scapegoat carries the burden of the group's anxieties, allowing everyone else to bond through their rejection. In that living room, I could feel this mechanism at work. As the gossip spread, as the judgments accumulated, I realized the dynamic wasn't limited to the individual who had just left. This was how the group operated, bonding through exclusion, through the shared pleasure of analysis, through the thrill of speaking about someone who couldn't defend themselves. It was control disguised as conversation. And here is the terrifying efficiency of gossip as a weapon. It punishes not only the absent, but the present too. Sitting in that circle, I felt the implicit threat. If they could speak this way about one person, if they could dissect someone else's life with such ease, then what would stop them from doing the same to me? The answer was clear: nothing, and eventually, as I later found out, they did. The group that spoke so casually about others had, in time, spoken the same way about me. The nervous system reads gossip as danger, even if you try to laugh along. As voices lowered into conspiratorial tones, as eyes flicked around the room to check who was listening, my own body tightened. My throat constricted, my posture folded in slightly, My voice grew more hesitant. The vagus nerve, which had already shifted toward withdrawal during the earlier tension, now deepened that withdrawal. The body recognizes gossip as unsafe because gossip signals instability. If reputations can be destroyed in silence, belonging is fragile. And fragile belonging is the most exhausting kind. Research supports this. Studies on ostracism, like Kip Williams' ostracism model, show that exclusion threatens four fundamental needs: belonging, self-esteem, control, and meaningful existence. Gossip operates as a preemptive exclusion. It reminds everyone present that belonging is conditional, that self-worth is negotiable, that control lies not in your hands, but in the group's, and that your social existence can be rewritten the moment you leave the room. This is why gossip feels both addictive and terrifying. Addictive, because joining in provides a rush of belonging, the dopamine hit of being inside rather than outside. Terrifying, because it carries the constant threat that one day the target will be you. The nervous system lives in that double bind, pulled towards safety through conformity, pushed toward fear by the fragility of that safety. Looking back, I recognized something else too: intuition. As the group dissected the absent individual, I felt a clarity settle in my chest, a whisper that said, "This isn't right. This isn't where you belong." It wasn't just a moral judgment. It was bodily knowing. My nervous system had mapped the dynamic and concluded, unsafe. And later, when I learned they had spoken behind my back as well, that intuition was confirmed. This is one of the paradoxical gifts of gossip. While it often silences us, sometimes it wakes us up too. By exposing the shadow mechanics of a group, gossip reveals its true foundations. If belonging requires complicity in tearing others down, then belonging is a trap. And the body knows this, even when the mind resists. Philosophically, gossip can be understood through Foucault's concept of surveillance. In his analysis of the panopticon, the prison where inmates never know when they are being watched, he showed how constant observation becomes internalized. People police themselves not because they are actively monitored, but because they might be. Gossip functions the same way. The group doesn't need to confront you directly. The knowledge that they gossip about others is enough to discipline your behavior. You become cautious, careful, and self-silencing to avoid being next. Nietzsche also wrote about herd morality, the way groups enforce sameness and punish difference. Gossip is one of the herd's sharpest tools. It demands conformity, not through argument, but through fear of ridicule. It rewards those who join in and punishes those who dissent. It turns individuality into risk. And in modern culture, gossip hasn't disappeared. It has scaled. Social media is a gossip weaponized by algorithms. Cancel culture, viral shaming, online pile-ons. These are digital versions of the same mechanism I witnessed in that living room. The crowd bonds by turning against someone, their absence or silence magnified into a spectacle. The nervous system reacts no differently. Shame flares, exclusion wounds, fear of being next silences. But there is another layer too. Gossip doesn't only punish, it controls desire. When a group gossips, it sets the standard for what is acceptable. You learn not only what not to do, but what you must do to belong. Your preferences, your values, your alignments shift subtly, not because you were persuaded, but because you were threatened. Girard's mimetic theory explains this. We desire what others desire, not because we choose it freely, but because deviation risks exclusion. Gossip polices not just behavior, but longing itself. Sitting in that room, I could feel this pull. Part of me wanted to stay quiet, to avoid being marked as disloyal. Part of me wanted to laugh along, to show I was in. And part of me recoiled, knowing this was false safety. The nervous system doesn't just register danger, it registers betrayal. The betrayal of self when you conform to something you know is wrong. That night, I didn't speak much. My silence wasn't just a freeze, it was a refusal. And though I didn't leave the group immediately, something had shifted. A crack had opened, the trust was broken. My body had already decided, this isn't home. In hindsight, I see this as a turning point. The gossip hurt, yes. The later realization that they had spoken behind my back hurt more. But the greater gift was the clarity it brought. Exclusion is painful, but false belonging is worse. The body sometimes uses pain to free us. This is the paradox of shadow control. It silences in the short term, but reveals the truth in the long term. Gossip creates fear, but fear can sharpen intuition. Exclusion wounds, but wounds can heal into wisdom. The lesson is not simply to condemn gossip, but to listen to what it reveals. When a group bonds through shadow, your body knows. Your nervous system whispers unsafe. And if you trust that whisper, you can step away before the knife turns toward you. When I think back to that night, the tense air when I walked in, the outburst, the glances, the gossip, I can't help but feel echoes of my childhood vibrating underneath it. It wasn't the first time I had been caught in silence. It wasn't the first time my body had folded into withdrawal in response to tension. The living room with friends may have looked like a very different setting from the classrooms and family spaces of my youth, but the nervous system doesn't recognize decor. It recognizes cues of safety and danger, and the cues were the same. As a child, I knew the taste of silence. Not chosen silence, but enforced silence, the silence of being overwhelmed, the silence of being unable to speak when pressed. Adults called it stubbornness or selective mutism, as if I were playing a game. But I wasn't. My nervous system was screaming. My throat locked, my breath shortened, my eyes averted. When asked to explain what was wrong, I couldn't. Not because I didn't want to, but because the words literally weren't accessible. Language requires the prefrontal cortex, but in moments of stress, that part of the brain goes offline. The amygdala floods the system, the vagus nerve clamps down, and what emerges isn't reasoned speech, but silence, tears, or meltdown. The more I was pressed, the worse it became. Each demand for explanation felt like a spotlight burning hotter. Shame wrapped around me like a second skin. I desperately wanted to communicate, to be understood, to be safe. But the harder I tried, the more my nervous system betrayed me. The silence grew heavier, and what was misread as refusal was, in truth, survival. Fast forward to adulthood, and the patterns still linger. In that group, I wasn't a child anymore. I had years of experience, insights, and resilience. And yet, the moment the room turned cold, the moment conflict surfaced, the old pattern rose again. Silence, withdrawal, observation. My voice shrank, my body folded in. It was the same nervous system script, replaying itself across decades. This is what we mean when we say the inner child lives on in us. It isn't just memory, it's weird. The strategies that once protected us, silence, compliance, and invisibility, remain in the nervous system as default settings. They activate automatically in adulthood, especially when social belonging feels threatened. The child who couldn't speak in the face of authority becomes the adult who withdraws in the face of group gossip. Different stage, same choreography. And here's the cruel irony. These protective strategies are often misunderstood by others. As a child, my silence was read as rebellion. As an adult, my quietness in the group might have been read as disinterest, aloofness, or even agreement with the gossip. The reality was none of those. The reality was fear, caution, and an unwillingness to contribute to something that felt unsafe. But the nervous system doesn't always translate cleanly for others. What is protection on the inside can look like resistance on the outside. Shame feeds on this misunderstanding. Brené Brown has described shame as the intensely painful feeling of being unworthy of love and belonging. For me, that pain often came not just from my silence, but from the way silence was misinterpreted. I wasn't just quiet, I was made to feel that my quietness itself was a flaw. That being unable to speak meant I was broken, wrong, defective. Over time, shame layers onto the nervous system like a second wound. First, the body protects you by silencing. Then, the world punishes you for that silence. The result is double isolation, from others and from yourself. The night with that group mirrored this pattern in miniature. My nervous system withdrew, protecting me through quietness. The group, busy gossiping, may not have noticed or cared. But internally, the old shame stirred. Why can't I just join in? Why am I always the one who feels different? Why does my body make me feel like an outsider even here? The present moment collided with the past, and suddenly I wasn't just a man in a room. I was also a child at a desk, tongue-tied under the weight of expectation, shrinking under the gaze of others. This is what trauma does. It collapses time. The nervous system doesn't distinguish between then and now. When the cues line up, tension, conflict, and group silence, The old programs run as if no years have passed at all. But there was also something different this time. Something that shows healing, however slow, is possible. Because while my body followed the old script, my awareness did not. In childhood, I had no framework for understanding what was happening to me. I thought I was failing, defective. In adulthood, sitting in that group, I could see the pattern for what it was. I could sense the gossip as a mechanism of control. I could feel the intuition that said, "This isn't about me being wrong. This is about the group being unsafe." That awareness didn't erase the silence. It didn't suddenly give me the confidence to speak boldly in the room. But it did give me perspective. It gave me a choice. Not in the moment, the freeze was still too strong, but in what followed. I didn't stay aligned with that group for long. I stepped away because I knew the cost of staying would be too high. This is the paradox of shame and exclusion. On the one hand, they wound deeply. They touch the most primal part of us, the part that craves belonging. On the other hand, they can also clarify. They can show us when belonging is false, when the price of acceptance is self-betrayal. Sometimes the body's withdrawal is not just protection from danger, but protection from corruption. It's the nervous system saying, better to be alone than to be complicit. Philosophically, this connects to the idea of authenticity. Thinkers like Søren Kierkegaard and Martin Heidegger warned against the crowd, the way group dynamics pull us away from our true selves. For Kierkegaard, truth was always individual, always rooted in subjective experience. For Heidegger, authenticity meant standing apart from the they, the anonymous collective that dictates how we should think and act. My silence in that group wasn't just fear. It was, in a strange way, authenticity. I could not participate in gossip because my body refused. What looked like weakness from the outside was, in fact, a kind of fidelity to self. And yet the cost was still pain, because authenticity often feels like exile. The inner child still craves belonging, still longs for acceptance, still flinches at exclusion. Walking away from the group may have been the right decision, but it didn't erase the ache of being outside. That ache is the residue of shame, and it never disappears entirely. This is where compassion for the inner child becomes crucial. Instead of judging myself for going quiet, I can now see the wisdom in it. That child who couldn't speak wasn't broken. He was protecting me. He was saying, "This isn't safe." That child who withdrew in the face of tension wasn't weak. He was discerning. He was pointing me away from false belonging towards something truer. When I look back at the group now, I see the entire arc. The nervous system reading danger, the freeze protecting me, the gossip exposing the truth, the intuition guiding me away, and the inner child carrying the wisdom of silence. What once felt like failure now looks like survival. What once felt like shame now looks like clarity. And this is what I want to share with anyone listening who has carried similar experiences. If you have ever felt silenced in a group, if you have ever walked away with the sting of gossip in your ears, if you have ever wondered why your body shrinks when everyone else seems comfortable, know this: you are not broken. Your body is telling the truth. Your silence is not proof of weakness. It is evidence of protection. And sometimes protection is the first step toward freedom. The inner child is not the enemy. The strategies it developed may no longer fit every situation, but they are not mistakes. They are testimonies of survival. And when we learn to listen to them with compassion, we can begin to discern when silence is fear and when silence is wisdom. That night with the group taught me both. It reminded me of the child who couldn't speak under pressure, and it revealed the adult who could finally recognize the pattern and step away. In that sense, the past and present joined hands. The child survived by silencing. The adult survived by leaving. Both were acts of courage, even if they looked like defeat at the time. The living room that night was small. Just a handful of people, a few conversations, one outburst, a circle of gossip. But what happened in that space was not just local. It was a microcosm of something much larger. Groups across time and culture have always managed tension through silence, shame, and exclusion. What I witnessed wasn't an anomaly. It was a mechanism. And when you step back far enough, you see that mechanism everywhere. Philosophers and social theorists have wrestled with this for centuries. Nietzsche spoke of herd morality, the instinct of groups to suppress individuality in favor of sameness. For him, the herd enforces mediocrity through shame. Foucault analyzed how surveillance disciplines bodies, showing how even the possibility of being watched makes us police ourselves. Girard exposed the scapegoat mechanism, how communities project attention onto a victim to restore unity. These frameworks illuminate part of the truth, but they are not the whole. Modern and contemporary thinkers extend this story in ways that are just as important. Take Irving Goffman, for example. His dramaturgical model describes social life as theatre, where we present ourselves on stage and hide our messy selves backstage. In this sense, gossip is not just regulation. It is a stage direction. It keeps actors in their roles. Step outside the script, and the group disciplines you back into character or casts you out entirely. That night in the group, gossip worked like stage whispers, reminders of who was acceptable, who had flubbed their lines, who risked losing their part in the play. Zygmunt Bauman, in his reflections on liquid modernity, argued that belonging today is more fragile than ever. In a world of shifting alliances, temporary connections, and disposable relationships, exclusion carries a different sting. Not only does it hurt, but it also reminds us how unstable all bonds have become. The gossip I heard that night wasn't just about one person's behaviour. It was about the fragility of all belonging. If they could be discarded, so could I. In Bauman's terms, we are all replaceable actors in a liquid society, held only as long as we are useful or entertaining. Judith Butler adds another dimension. In The Psychic Life of Power, she explores how norms are internalized, how power operates not only through external punishment, but through our own desire to be recognized. Shame becomes internal, woven into our very sense of self. This means exclusion doesn't always require others to act directly. Sometimes we preemptively exclude ourselves, anticipating rejection. I felt a version of this in the group. My voice quietened not only because of what others did, but because of what I had already internalized. The fear of shame silenced me before anyone needed to. Byung-Chul Han, a contemporary philosopher, writes about our achievement society, where control no longer works primarily through prohibition, but through self-discipline and comparison. In his analysis, shame has been repackaged as the pressure to perform, to optimize, to keep up. Social media amplifies this. We curate our lives into highlight reels while quietly fearing exclusion if we fail to impress. The gossip of the living room is now broadcast online, algorithmically amplified, permanent in digital memory. Where once you might have been shamed by a dozen, now you can be shamed by millions. Sarah Ahmed, in The Cultural Politics of Emotion, reminds us that emotions don't just belong to individuals, they circulate. Fear, shame, disgust, they stick to certain bodies, marking them as outsiders. Groups use gossip and exclusion to attach negative emotions to the other, creating cohesion by casting someone as the problem. This was what I saw that night. The absent individual marked with disgust, their behaviour narrated as unacceptable, their very presence rewritten as dangerous to group harmony. In that process, the group defined itself as good by positioning itself as bad. And then there is Slavoj Žižek, who often points out that ideology works not by what is said, but by what is unsaid, the implicit rules of belonging. Gossip reveals these unsaid rules. When the group dissected the absent person, they weren't just describing behavior. They were reinforcing the invisible boundaries of what was permitted. To laugh at the wrong time, to ask the wrong question, to act too boldly. These were risks that could get you placed on the gossip bench. And once there, you were no longer simply a member. You were an example. In all these theories, one theme repeats. Exclusion is not accidental. It is structural. It is how groups cohere, how systems perpetuate themselves, how individuals are shaped into compliant selves. The nervous system feels it as pain, but culture enshrines it as order. But philosophy also offers a countercurrent. Thinkers from Eastern traditions remind us that belonging is not always found in groups. Taoism speaks of alignment with the way, an attunement to the flow of reality itself, rather than to human approval. Buddhism speaks of non-attachment, of recognizing that the craving for belonging can itself be a source of suffering. Existentialists like Kierkegaard and Camus emphasized authenticity, the courage to stand apart from the crowd, even when it means loneliness. Each of these perspectives offers a path out of the trap, to locate worth not in the group's acceptance, but in alignment with something deeper: truth, compassion, authenticity. The way. The group that night revealed to me a truth I had resisted for years. Not every belonging is worth keeping. Not every community is safe. Sometimes exclusion is a gift in disguise, a nudge toward freedom. My nervous system felt the sting of shame and the ache of silence, but beneath that was a quieter knowing. Better to be excluded here than to lose myself in complicity. Culturally, though, resisting exclusion is easier said than done. The cost of standing apart can be severe. Cancel culture, online shaming, and public humiliation are amplified forms of the same mechanism I saw in miniature. To be marked out as deviant, wrong, unworthy is to risk livelihood, reputation, and relationships. And because the nervous system registers exclusion as a mortal threat, the fear of these consequences often keeps us in line. We stay silent when we should speak. We laugh along when we want to resist. We choose false belonging over authenticity because survival feels at stake. But survival is not the same as living. To live fully is to risk exile, to choose authenticity over conformity. And the body, when listened to carefully, can guide us there. The shame, the withdrawal, the ache, they are signals not only of pain but of misalignment. They whisper, "This isn't your place. This isn't your truth." And sometimes the greatest act of resistance is simply to walk away. By now we've traced the entire arc of that night. The moment I walked into the room and felt the atmosphere shift, the outburst that froze the group, the collective glance that amplified shame, the gossip that bound the group through shadow, the memories of my inner child that echoed in my silence, and the philosophies that help us make sense of exclusion and control. But I want to end by turning back to the body, because everything we've explored, shame, silence, exclusion, is not just a matter of ideas. It is lived in the body. It is written into posture, breath, tone, and gut. And unless we learn to notice these signs, we will remain trapped in cycles of social punishment, mistaking nervous system alarms for personal failings. So let's slow this down and look closely at what happens step by step when the group turns cold. The first sign is in the throat, a tightening, a dryness, a lump that makes speech harder. This isn't metaphorical. The vagus nerve directly innervates the muscles of the throat and larynx. When social safety flickers off, the throat constricts. Your voice grows thinner, higher, or vanishes entirely. This is why exclusion so often feels like being choked. The second sign is on the face. Heat rises, color floods the cheeks. The body exposes shame in blushing, a signal we can't easily hide. At the same time, the muscles around the eyes and mouth lose their ease. The social engagement system that normally gives us expressive, warm features goes offline. The face becomes blank or stiff, as though betraying us in both directions. Too much exposure, too little expression. The third sign is in the gut. The insula translates social threat into visceral sensations. A knot in the stomach, nausea, and sudden hunger loss. This is the enteric nervous system, sometimes called the second brain, responding to the amygdala's alarm. The gut knows before words form. It whispers, "Unsafe, unsafe, unsafe." The fourth sign is in posture. Shoulders collapse inward, chest caves, head lowers. This is not only emotional, but evolutionary. Submissive posture reduces the chance of further attack. To make yourself smaller is to signal surrender, to avoid drawing attention. Shame feels like shrinking, because shame literally shrinks the body. The fifth sign is in breath and heart. Breathing becomes shallow, quick, and held high in the chest. The heart rate stutters, first racing in sympathetic arousal, then slowing in dorsal vagal collapse. This is why exclusion feels exhausting. The oscillation between hyperarousal and shutdown taxes the entire system. Each of these signs tells the same story, the body reading social exclusion as mortal danger. And because most of us were never taught to listen to these signals, we misinterpret them. We think we are weak, we think we are broken, but the truth is simpler. We are human, so what can we do? We cannot stop groups from gossiping. We cannot prevent others from weaponizing shame, but we can learn to listen, to regulate, and to choose differently. Here are a few practices. Practice 1, naming the signs. The next time you feel your throat tighten in a group, silently name it. throat closing, vagus nerve pulling back. When your gut clenches, name it, gut alarm insula active. This simple act of naming shifts experience from unconscious reaction to conscious awareness. It doesn't erase the discomfort, but it loosens its grip. Practice 2, the exhale reset. When you feel shame burning your face, lengthen your exhale. Inhale naturally, then exhale slowly through pursed lips as though blowing through a straw. This activates the ventral vagal branch, gently bringing the body back towards social safety. You may not regain your full voice immediately, but you will prevent collapse. Practice 3, the grounded gaze. In moments of exclusion, eyes dart nervously. To steady yourself, pick one neutral object in the room, a chair, a painting, the edge of a table, and let your gaze rest there. This interrupts the scanning loop of the amygdala, reminding the body that not everything in the environment is dangerous. Safety can be found in stillness. Practice 4, the inner child check. When silence overtakes you, ask quietly inside, who is this silence protecting? Often, you will find it is the child who learned that speaking was dangerous. Instead of fighting that silence, thank it. Whisper inward, I see you, you kept me safe once. You don't have to carry this forever. This transforms shame into compassion, turning silence from an enemy into a friend. Practice 5, choosing exit over endurance. Sometimes the body is not telling you to regulate and stay. Sometimes it is telling you to leave. As I realized that night, gossip was a sign of deeper danger. The nervous system doesn't always ask for endurance. Sometimes it demands departure. Trusting that message, walking away rather than conforming, is perhaps the deepest practice of all. And here's a sign to notice in others. When someone in a group suddenly grows quieter, smaller, or stiffer, don't assume disinterest. Don't assume arrogance. Assume their nervous system is under threat. Shame often hides in silence. The kindest thing we can do is to offer signals of safety. A soft gaze, a gentle tone, an invitation without pressure. Safety is not restored by telling someone to relax. It is restored by embodying calm ourselves. This is why listening to the body is not just personal healing, it is cultural resistance. When we refuse to join gossip, when we refuse to weaponize silence, when we offer safety instead of suspicion, we break the cycle of social punishment. We remind each other that belonging can be rooted in compassion, not fear. But let's not romanticize this. The cost of refusing gossip, of stepping away from unsafe groups, can be high. You may lose friends, networks, even entire communities. The nervous system will still ache with exclusion. But as I learned, false belonging carries its own cost. To stay in a group where safety depends on complicity is to exile yourself from your own truth. And that is the deepest exile of all. So let me leave you with a reflection. Think of a time when you were silenced by a group. Maybe it was an awkward pause after you spoke. Maybe it was laughter at your expense. Maybe it was gossip you overheard. Where did you feel it in your body? Was it your throat, your gut, your posture? And now ask, what did that silence teach you? Did it drive you deeper into shame, or did it whisper the truth that this wasn't your place? And a practice, this week, notice one moment of gossip. Don't judge, don't preach. Just notice the shift in your body. Does your chest tighten? Does your voice dim? Does your gut clench? Then gently ask yourself, do I want to belong here at this cost? Let the body answer. Trust it even if the answer asks you to walk away, because exclusion is painful, but it can also be clarifying. Shame burns, but it can also reveal. Silence wounds, but it can also protect. The body is not your enemy in these moments. It is your compass. This has been episode 3 of The Body Knows. We've explored social punishment and control, how shame, exclusion, and silence regulate belonging, how gossip binds groups through shadow, how the nervous system reacts step by step, and how the inner child still echoes in our adult encounters. We've also seen that while these dynamics hurt, they can also guide. They show us which groups are unsafe, which bonds are false, and where authenticity demands we walk away. In our next episode, we'll shift from punishment to reward. Episode 4, The Currency of Desire. We'll look at how groups and systems not only control us through exclusion, but also through seduction, through the manipulation of longing, reward, and approval. From dopamine to attention economies, from flattery to cult initiation, we'll explore how desire itself becomes a tool of control. Until then, remember this. Your body already knows when belonging is false. Listen to its whispers, honor its silences, and never forget that exclusion from the wrong group is not failure, it is freedom in disguise. And as always, if you want to explore these themes further, my other projects, the Inversiverse and the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, weave these threads into wider tapestries of culture, psychology, and self. Together, they remind us that the body is not just a vessel of survival, but a compass of truth. Thank you for listening. Stay awake, stay compassionate, and trust what your body tells you. James Miller.